The night air on Iwo Jima carried a strange kind of stillness, one that came only after hours of artillery pounding the black volcanic sand. Deep inside a reinforced bunker on the slopes of Mount Suribachi, Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto bent over a small notebook, his hands shaking, as he wrote words that would have meant execution if discovered. The Marines are not human. They do not die like other men. He had grown up believing America was soft, its people too comfortable, too individualistic, too fearful of sacrifice. Yet here on this island, where survival was measured in minutes, he watched US Marines advance through fire as if pain had no claim on them. 3 had already fallen. The rest kept moving step after step into the storm. Outside the bunker, the sand trembled with the weight of an advancing machine, rifle, fire tank engines, flamethrowers, clearing the caves one by one. Yamamoto realized the truth. His commanders never admitted spirit. Alone could not stop an enemy, backed by endless steel firepower and resolve. What made the US Marines so different from every other American unit the Imperial Japanese Army had faced in the Pacific War? And why did Japanese soldiers fear them more than any other foe? Long before the black sands of Iwo Jima, the Imperial Japanese Army believed it understood the American character. The United States, they were told, was a land softened by prosperity, a democracy that bred comfort, not resilience. Even elite troops like the US Marines were dismissed as products of a society that valued the individual above the collective. Such men, Japanese officers argued, would break under pressure. They would not endure hardship. They would never willingly die for one another. That illusion began to collapse on August 7, 1942, when the US Marines of the 1st Marine Division stepped onto the shores of Guadalcanal. They were not the timid adversaries Japanese commanders expected. The island's tangled jungle, the choking humidity, the disease-filled nights, these conditions had worn down entire Chinese divisions during earlier Japanese campaigns. Yet the Marines held the beaches with a kind of stubborn, methodical determination that unsettled even veteran observers. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, who had fought in China and believed no army could match Japanese night fighting skill, wrote in his diary after the first week, "The Americans who landed are different from any enemy we have faced. They do not retreat when surrounded. They do not surrender when hopeless." The shock deepened on the night of August 20th when Lieutenant Shigeru Fukudome led a reinforced company to retake Henderson Field. His 200 men, hardened by victories across Asia, advanced in textbook fashion through the darkness, certain that American lines would shatter. Instead, they walked into a killing ground. The US Marines, waiting in interlocking fields of fire, unleashed a storm that tore entire platoons apart before they could close the distance. What followed defied every expectation. Rather than remaining behind their defenses, the Marines counterattacked into the night, moving with a confidence and precision Fukudome had believed impossible for Western troops in darkness. His recovered diary captured the disbelief. "They attacked us in the night. We are the ones who attack at night." By dawn, only 90 of his men remained. The Marines had suffered 12 casualties. Across Guadalcanal, this pattern repeated. Japanese soldiers, accustomed to enemies who collapsed under banzai charges, now faced defenders who refused to yield, even when overrun men who fought with bayonets, entrenching tools, and bare hands when ammunition ran dry. Each clash chipped away at the belief that Japanese spirit alone guaranteed victory. For the Imperial Japanese Army, Guadalcanal was supposed to be a swift correction, a brief engagement to erase an American foothold. Instead, it became the first undeniable proof that the US Marines represented something far more formidable, an opponent whose courage equaled Japanese resolve. but whose discipline and tactical adaptability were unlike anything they had encountered in the Pacific War. The shock of Guadalcanal had barely settled when a harsher truth emerged. The US Marines were not only resilient, they were relentless. Nowhere did this become clearer than on the tiny, heavily fortified coral atoll of Tarawa. Rear Admiral Kei Shibasaki had assured his 500 defenders that 1,000,000 Americans could not take Tarawa in 100 years. His fortifications were brutal masterworks, concrete bunkers, interlocking fields of fire and reefs designed to trap landing craft. On November 20th, 1943, the first waves of US Marines proved him both right and terribly wrong. The opening minutes were a massacre. Dozens died in the water before reaching the beach. Another wave fell inches from the sand, pinned down by machine guns firing with mechanical precision. Yet, the Marines kept coming. By the third wave, flamethrower teams and demolition units were already forcing their way into Shibasaki's strongest positions. In 76 hours, Tarawa fell. Nearly 400 men died on that single scrap of land, proof that the Marines would seize any objective, no matter the cost. For Japanese commanders, the pattern was more terrifying than the numbers. Casualties did not slow Marine offensives. They absorbed losses that should have shattered morale and continued advancing, as if driven by some internal engine that refused to stall. That same engine ground forward on Peleliu. Lieutenant Colonel Kunio Nakagawa had designed a defense in depth meant to bleed the Americans dry. He anticipated a week-long battle. Instead, the fighting stretched to 11 exhausting weeks. The 1st Marine Division took such severe losses that it had to be withdrawn, yet the broader offensive never paused. Reinforcements arrived, supplies arrived, the pressure never lifted. For Nakagawa, this was the true nightmare of the Pacific War. Every Japanese casualty was permanent. Every American casualty could be replaced. On Saipan, the limits of Japanese doctrine cracked completely. In the pre-dawn hours of June 25th, nearly 3,000 Japanese soldiers launched one of the largest banzai charges of the war, surging toward Marine lines, with the certainty that sheer ferocity would break the Americans. Instead, the Marines counterattacked immediately, instinctively. Artillery fired at point-blank range. Machine gunners held their ground. Officers rallied men into improvised defensive stands. When dawn came, thousands of Japanese bodies covered the field. Marine casualties totaled just over 300. Private First Class Tishi Yoshida, wounded and stunned, later said, "We charged expecting them to run. They fought us hand to hand and defeated us. We were lied to." The lesson was unmistakable. The US Marines fought with a combination the Imperial Japanese Army had never prepared for aggression, equal to their own discipline, twice as sharp firepower, 10 times stronger, and a willingness to accept losses that defied Japanese understanding of rational warfare. In these battles, Tarawa, Peleliu, Saipan, the fear took root. The Japanese realized they were not facing ordinary American troops. They were facing a force that calculated victory, mathematically paid its terrible costs without hesitation, and advanced across the Pacific with the slow crushing certainty of an incoming tide. By early 1945, the war in the Pacific had revealed its final brutal equation. The Imperial Japanese Army could fight with extraordinary resolve, but the US Marines could fight with equal resolve and with the weight of an industrial superpower behind them. Nowhere did this imbalance become more painfully clear than on the black sands of Iwo Jima. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, arguably Japan's most capable defensive strategist, understood from the outset that the island could not be held. His orders reflected a grim arithmetic every hour of resistance. Every Marine killed, every meter of ground contested, would buy time for the home islands. Victory was impossible. Sacrifice was the mission. On February 19th, 1945, 70,000 US Marines landed on Iwo Jima. The naval bombardment that preceded them had shaken the island, but barely scratched Kuribayashi's labyrinth of caves, tunnels, and pillboxes. As the first assault waves crossed the beach, Japanese artillery opened with devastating accuracy. Within minutes, the sand was strewn with bodies, the air choked with smoke and volcanic dust. Yet the Marines did not fall back. They advanced through shell fire, through craters, through interlocking fields of fire that should have halted any rational force. Demolition teams crawled forward under machine gun bursts. Flamethrower operators died one after another, each man replaced instantly by the next. In the first hour alone, Japanese defenders watched entire squads press on after suffering casualties that would have shattered a seasoned battalion. To the men in the tunnels, it seemed madness. To the Marines, it was doctrine. For Japanese soldiers starving in the darkness, the true despair came not from the fighting, but from what they witnessed during nighttime infiltrations. 3 days after the landings, Second Lieutenant Toshio Yamamoto crept close to the Marine perimeter, expecting to find exhausted troops running short on ammunition and food conditions any Japanese unit would have faced after such combat. Instead, he saw Marines eating hot meals, receiving fresh ammunition by truck, rotating units off the line for rest, and receiving medical care in well-equipped aid stations. Their supply dumps held more ammunition than his entire regiment. In that moment, Yamamoto grasped the scale of the imbalance. The Marines were fighting the most intense battle of the Pacific War, yet they lived better on a contested beachhead than Japanese troops did in permanent garrisons. For Japan, every casualty was final. Every round of ammunition could not be replaced. For the US Marines, casualties were evacuated by air and sea replacements, delivered within weeks, and ammunition flowed endlessly from ships offshore. The longer the battle lasted, the stronger the Marines became, and the weaker the defenders grew. When Iwo Jima finally fell on March 26th, the consequences were stark. 21,000 Japanese defenders died. Fewer than 2,000 were captured, most of them unable to resist. The US Marines suffered 26,000 casualties, nearly 40% of their landing force, and yet Marine divisions were ready for action again within weeks. For Japanese survivors, this ability to absorb staggering losses without slowing became the most terrifying truth of all. It was at Iwo Jima that the outcome of the Pacific War felt mathematically certain. Japan could fight with courage, but the Marines fought with courage, backed by endless steel medicine and manpower. In that equation, only one side could endure. To understand why the US Marines became the most feared opponents of the Imperial Japanese Army, it is necessary to step beyond the trenches and tunnels and view the conflict from a wider lens, from the perspective of the United States and the world watching the Pacific burn. For American commanders, the Marines were not simply assault troops. They were the sharp edge of a national strategy built on mass momentum and unwavering resolve. They embodied a uniquely American fusion individual toughness, shaped by training and collective strength, sustained by industry. In Washington, military planners understood that the Pacific War would be a contest of endurance. Geography alone made it inevitable. Island by island, mile by mile, the Marines became the instrument through which America projected its power across thousands of oceanic miles. Their victories, bloody, costly, but relentless, signaled to allies and adversaries alike that the United States could fight far from home with a consistency no other nation could match. Global observers took note. British, Australian, and New Zealand officers who fought alongside the Americans saw firsthand the scale of the US logistical machine. They watched Marine units rotate out of combat, rest, refit, and return to the line with a speed impossible for Japanese forces. They saw modern medicine save men who would have died in any other army. They recognized that the Marines represented not only American courage, but American capacity. For Japan's surviving soldiers, this realization came with a different weight. In the months after the war, during interrogations, and in quiet conversations on transport ships, many admitted a bitter truth. They had been taught that Japanese spirit would triumph over American materialism. Yet it was the Marines who blended spirit and material into something unstoppable. It was the Marines who fought with a discipline as fierce as any samurai tradition, backed by a nation whose factories, shipyards, doctors and engineers marched with them onto every island. On the home front, Americans saw the cost etched in casualty lists and battlefield reports. But they also sensed that the Marines were carrying a burden the world needed them to carry. Each success, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, sent a message beyond strategy. It demonstrated that freedom could outlast fanaticism, and that democracy, when mobilized, possessed a fighting power no empire could equal. This is why, in the eyes of both allies and enemies, the US Marines came to represent something larger than a single branch of service. They were the embodiment of a nation's will and the proof that in modern war, courage means nothing unless a country stands ready to sustain it. When the guns fell silent across the Pacific, one truth remained etched into the memories of those who survived. No force had shaped Japan's experience of the war more profoundly than the US Marines. For the men of the Imperial Japanese Army, fighting Marines was unlike fighting any other enemy. It meant facing soldiers who refused to retreat when logic demanded it, who advanced through fire when survival required them to stop, and who carried with them the weight of a nation capable of sustaining war on a scale Japan could never match. From the jungles of Guadalcanal to the coral sands of Tarawa, from the ridges of Saipan to the black volcanic slopes of Iwo Jima, the Marines demonstrated a combination of courage, discipline, and industrial strength that redefined what modern war could demand of human beings. Japanese soldiers learned often in their final moments that American toughness was not a math, but a system. 8 weeks of brutal training, years of industrial preparation, and a national commitment to supply every Marine with the tools needed to win. This was the legacy that haunted General Kuribayashi's final message from Iwo Jima, when he wrote that the Marines possessed courage equal to ours and numbers without end. In those words lies the core of why they were feared. The Marines fought with a spirit every Japanese soldier understood, but with resources no Japanese soldier could hope to match. Against such a force, bravery alone was never enough. The legacy of the Pacific War lives on in more than statistics. It endures in the stories of men who fought through terror and exhaustion, in the letters left behind in bunkers and rifle pits, and in the lessons carved into the memory of nations. The Marines proved that in the crucible of modern conflict, victory belongs not only to those willing to die, but to those whose society equips them to endure. As we look back on these battles, each one paid for in blood, we are left with a question. History asks of every generation, what should we learn from the price they paid? Did the war show the limits of courage or the responsibility that comes with national power? If this story moves you, consider sharing your thoughts. What do you believe is the greatest lesson the Pacific War leaves for us today? And if you value the history that shaped our world, we invite you to subscribe and join us for the next chapter in this long unfinished story of war, sacrifice, and the human cost of victory.